Morbius broke me. I just came back from seeing it, and yeah, it's bad, but you already knew that. So in this video, I'm gonna talk a bit about why and how it's bad. So bad that it's defeated my attempts to analyze it seriously. I haven't managed to get a script together because, as I said, I just came back from the cinema, and this thing has fried my brain. To the point where if I went in a CT scanner right now, all you'd get is an image of a hash brown on screen. So this video, this critique, my thoughts, they might all be a bit jumbled and messy, but hey, at least that matches the film, right? Oh, and by the way, since this film has just come out, there's not a great deal of usable footage for me to edit with, so I am sorry about this, but the visuals for this video are gonna have to be less detailed than is typical for the channel. I'm gonna try and keep roughly in chronological order, at least until I get sidetracked by a big tangent or whatever. Oh, and full spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen the film and actually want to for some reason, then you can check out my 1-minute review on screen now, which is spoiler-free. So the film opens with Michael Morbius on a helicopter touching down on some remote Central American mountain to study these local bats. He's got a rare genetic condition which means he's ill in ways, I guess. He's weak, he walks with crutches, and he needs regular blood transfusions. All of this is immediately apparent upon seeing Morbius, let alone spending hours if not days in his presence. But when he gets out of the helicopter he'd been in for presumably a while, because this place is fairly remote, the helicopter guy, seeing his crutches, seeing his difficulty walking, says, "Oh, hey buddy, do you need a doctor?" To which Morbius replies, "I am the doctor." And sure, that's a cool line for the trailer, I guess. But if you think about it for more than literally 1 millisecond, it kind of makes no sense. Do these guys not already know that he's a doctor? Why else is he going to the Bat Cave? No, not that Bat Cave, a less interesting one. And okay, even if he hasn't told them the details about his person or his mission, they've seen him walk to get to the helicopter. They know that he struggles. So why are they asking this now? And not, when they met him? And also, what are they gonna do if he says, "Yeah, actually, I do need a doctor. I've taken a turn for the worse and require medical assistance urgently, thanks for asking." What are you gonna do? You just flew him to the middle of nowhere. There's not a hospital down the road. There's just bats and nothing else for miles. You know this. Why ask that question? If, like me, this dilemma was all you could think of during the first couple of minutes of this film, then you probably came to the same conclusion I did fairly quickly. This exchange only happens because this is the opening scene of the film, and we need to know that Morbius is a doctor. It doesn't go any deeper than that. Don't think about it any deeper than that. Sony wants you to know that their character is a doctor. But yeah, after this he cuts his hand to attract those bats. You've all seen the trailer. You know what goes down. And then we move swiftly on to the inevitable childhood flashback sequence. And we'll talk about a couple of aspects of that in a second, but first let's talk about that swift moving on. The film's pace, at least for the first couple of acts, is lightning fast. And that's good, but it's also bad. It's good because it means the film's runtime is mercifully short. It's like an hour and a half, so you have to spend less time actually watching it. That's certainly a positive, but on the other hand, this pacing, this structure is bare bones and it's so formulaic. The start of this film moves so robotically from the opening to the backstory to the origin of the powers that none of it's a surprise. And yeah, these films are all formulaic to one degree or another, but this really just takes the cake. This is superhero origin by numbers, but it moves on at such a clip that there's really no substance to any of it. We meet like a handful of supporting characters, including a little girl who we barely see again for the rest of the film. Definitely some stuff on the cutting room floor there, but all of these are such obvious and uninspired riffs on tired tropes and archetypes. Within the first 10 minutes or so, we meet the childhood best friend, who will obviously go on to be the main villain, as well as the attractive co-worker with whom Morbius has a flirty relationship, obvious love interest there, and the surrogate father figure. I'll let you guess which one of these two the film kills off for a cheap emotional moment. Did you guess? Well, either way you're right, because it happens to both of them. But then it doesn't. It walks one of them back in a way that is never explained or foreshadowed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about that flashback scene. We see Morbius as a kid in some ridiculously inept children's hospital in Greece, and he's joined by a new kid, Lucian, who's also got the same rare blood disease. But don't worry if you didn't notice they had a disease. The film only explicitly mentioned it a couple of times and showed you it a bunch more. Because as soon as Lucian arrives here and starts talking to Morbius, he instantly has a massive medical crisis and passes out. And there's no nurses or doctors anywhere around to help or even in earshot, so little kid Morbius has to fix the dialysis machine himself, which he does with a pen. This is the film showing us that Morbius is very intelligent, which was sort of implied in the previous scene but wasn't outright stated. But hold on, all these kids have this same rare blood disease. If it causes attacks like this, and if those attacks are so urgent that Morbius feels the need to repair the machine ad hoc with a pen rather than waiting for help, then how are all these kids not already dead? Because this scene also shows us that the management of this hospital is so dreadfully poor that one of these, again, very common attacks can be entirely missed by staff. No one's here to deal with this. If that sort of absence is even a possibility, then how on earth has Morbius survived this long? At about this same time, something else happens. Across the road there's a school and the kids come out to go home. A bunch of them, though, apropos of nothing, stop and point to the windows of the children's hospital and laugh loudly at the disabled children. And yeah, kids can be vicious. I've got no problem buying that this could happen, but they're not reacting to anything. Morbius and Lucien haven't looked out the window, haven't shown themselves in any way. They're just laughing at a building. Do they do this every day? Again, I've got no problem with the concept of this moment, but the way it's deployed is pretty silly and pretty heavy-handed. Just have Lucien open the window and look out as he gets to his new digs, not knowing any better. Have this be the thing that triggers the bullying. Or better yet, cut it, because the same thing happens a scene later, more or less. Lucien goes outside to chase a note that had fallen out the window and gets harassed and attacked by these bullies. Leave this scene in, because it actually matters. It shows us how bloodthirsty Lucien, or Milo as he's now called, actually is, which is relevant for the future of the film. And that name change is just another example of a weird, confusing, unnecessary detail. Morbius calls Lucien Milo as he gets there because the kid who had that bed before was called Milo before he died. Well, I'm summarizing, but that's more or less the gist of it. And that's a decent line. It communicates to the audience how dire the prognosis of kids afflicted with this disease is. But it's confusing and downright bizarre that after this point, Lucien now goes by Milo. Even the adults at the hospital call him Milo. For the rest of his life, he goes by Milo. Why? Maybe there's comic book precedent for this, I don't know, but it's dumb. And it really took me out of the movie because I was trying to figure out if this was now a flashback, if we were seeing the original Milo. But no, it's just Lucien. I don't get it. Why do they all just keep calling him Milo? Imagine if you got checked into a hospital as a kid and some weirdo in the bed next to yours just starts calling you Timothy for no reason. And then the next day the hospital staff are calling you Timothy too. I get why he turns out to be a villain. That'd drive me mad. The breakneck pace I mentioned earlier is very visible in this sequence. Practically as soon as Morbius meets Lucien, the first conversation they have is a discussion on what each kid would do if they were normal, if they were healthy. It's one of the only conversations we see these two have as children. After this, the film jumps straight to them being best friends. How awfully convenient then for both us, the viewer, and Sony, the studio, that within minutes of meeting, these two cement a lifelong bond in a way that sets up what's more or less the only real idea that the film even pretends to explore. Speaking of Milo, or Lucien, or whoever, let's talk about actors and performances a little, because I could keep doing a blow-by-blow of the entire film and pointing out all the weird nonsense, but we'd be here hours, and I don't want to have to think about Morbius for that much longer, because my brain will implode. I can't tell if Matt Smith is phoning it in or hamming it up, having a good time chewing the scenery. Either way, it's fine. This character is definitely a more engaging on-screen presence than Jared, but this is a performance equal parts sinister and whimsical, and as such, it doesn't always mesh well with the moribund tone the film is trying to strike. Jared Leto's performance, meanwhile, is certainly one of the performances of all time. He plays a long-haired, lanky, kind of mean-spirited guy with a clear superiority complex. So yeah, he's sort of playing himself here. Adria Arjona as Martine, Morbius's colleague and love interest, is, I think, the only actor among the cast who's actually trying earnestly to give an emotional and naturalistic performance. And at times, it's pretty good, although there's a certain unintentional humor in the scenes where we cut back and forth between her realistically distressed and terrified face and bargain bin Dracula munching on bodies. And on the topic of Martine, the performance is good, but the character kind of isn't. For instance, she's introduced as this expert, top-level researcher, but in the same scene, we're shown she has some weirdly moralistic hang-ups on experimenting with bats and human DNA, which in itself is a bit strange for such a successful biologist, but then in almost the very next scene, she's on board a ship in international waters to help Morbius pull off this bat experimentation. And on the topic of this little maritime soiree, in the previous scene, Morbius said that he kept all of this bat nonsense from Martine because he wanted her to have plausible deniability, since it's illegal or whatever. But then he brings her along anyway. So is she morally against this experimentation? Does Morbius want to keep her safe from the ramifications of these experiments? Your guess is as good as mine, because we just go straight to them on the boat without resolving either of these issues. And this boat sequence is dumb too. At one point, as Morbius is transforming or whatever, the most cliched loutish thug you've ever seen wanders into the room and starts leering at Martine, and generally acting like a bit of a wanker. At this point, the camera returns to the operating table and surprise, surprise, Morbius is gone. No prizes will be awarded for guessing what happens next. Yep, the red shirt gets Morbiused. That's some gripping, edge-of-your-seat storytelling. And also, what's going on with this boat? We're told that it's sailing 13 miles off the edge of Long Island, just over the borders of international waters, so the scientists can do their science without worrying about the law. So why is there an entire crew of, I don't know, pirates on board with automatic rifles? Are they expecting Jack Sparrow to show up? They're probably still within eyesight of Coney Island. Why are they decked out like this? Ah, yes, of course. It's so you can have an action sequence with Morbius sneaking around and people shooting at him. Yay, thanks, Sony. It just keeps getting worse though, because after they get back to land, after Morbius discovers that he's, this vampire thing, his friend Matt Smith / Lucian / Milo / whoever, I guess, comes to see him. Milo knew that Morbius was out there on the open seas trying to cure their condition, and that leads to one of the most bizarre scenes in the movie. He comes into the lab, he sees Morbius locked up in a cage, writing blood on the wall of his containment cell. He sees him guzzle down a blood bag and then morph into a vampire lord from Skyrim, and he's not fazed by it at all. He just says, "Oh, you found a cure, well done. Milo, your friend is turning into Nosferatu. Show some concern, show some surprise, show anything." Yeah, the title of this video isn't an exaggeration. I am broken, mentally and spiritually. But that's not even the worst part of this scene. After Milo comes in asking about the cure in a weirdly blasé way, Morbius just rejects all these questions in the vaguest way possible. I'm going from memory, but it's something along the lines of, "Milo, hey, you cured the disease. We don't have to die now. That's great. Can I have some of this cure, please?" Morbius, "No, you can't. I made a mistake. The price is too high." Milo, "What are you talking about? I don't want to die. Can you cure me, please?" Morbius, "No, you gotta go away. Go now." As we'll go on to see, Milo's a bit of a head case, but I think there's a solid chance he wouldn't have taken the serum if Morbius had said something to him like, "Yes, I did try and cure us, but I royally screwed up, because it's turned me into a poorly rendered monster. I now have an irresistible urge to drink human blood." Clearly, though, Milo, it's affected the disease in some way, so I'll keep on researching it, because there's clearly something here, so just bear with me, okay? If a film's central conflict relies this much on miscommunication, then you probably haven't done a very good job writing it. This scene is oddly reminiscent too of another time Sony shat the bed. I don't know how many of you remember The Amazing Spider-Man 2 very well, I sure don't, but there's a scene in it where Harry Osborn has a similar rare blood disease and he needs some of Spider-Man's blood to try and make a cure. And Peter's all like, "Oh no, it might get into the wrong hands. I'm sorry, childhood best friend, just gonna have to die, I guess." Instead of saying, "Hey, yeah, I'd love to help you, but, I want to be in the room so I can make sure nothing happens to my blood, which could cause untold destruction if it gets into the wrong hands. But I'm Spider-Man, I'm literally all about saving lives, so there's got to be a way we can do this safely and securely." This Morbius scene is so weirdly reminiscent of that and so nonsensical in the same way that it just wrinkles my brain, man. A little later on, a couple of detectives are trying to find Michael because they think he did the Morbius on the boat and killed the man, so they come up to him as he's leaving work and try and interrogate him. Apart from being weirdly blasé about all those dead people or pirates or whoever they are, there's two major head scratches with this sequence. First, there's a god-awful stinker of a line. As they're trying to establish whether he was or wasn't on that boat, doing the bat experiment thing, the detectives are asking him if he likes to do a bit of science now and then. For instance, and this next line is quoted verbatim from the film, "Crazy experiments? Maybe on a boat?" Wow, good job, stupid detective. That's a real subtle question. He's not gonna know what you're driving at there, you dumb shit. But the next bit is also strange, as it becomes clear that he's hiding something and that, other vampire stuff is going on. They're just try and kill him. They just start shooting at him, shooting in this massively inhabited building. And then the head detective like teleports to the ceiling, like gets there inhumanly fast, and tries to shoot him again in the head. Now, I'm not a New York City detective, but I don't think that's the proper procedure. A bit later on, he goes to jail, and Milo comes to visit him, and he walks in all limping and pretending to, still be diseased. And as he leaves the cell, he drops off a blood pack for Morbius to drink. And that's kind of dumb. I don't think they let people just give you stuff in prison. I think you'd probably get searched, or at the very least, the blood pack that he left in very open view would have been spotted by the guard. But that's not the dumb thing. He also leaves his cane, so Morbius now knows that he's no longer disabled and that he's vampired himself up. And yeah, afterwards it seems like Milo probably wanted him to figure this out, but why even bother with the cane then? This leads wonderfully to a segment I'm calling Milo Makes No Sense. What's his motivation? Why does he do any of the things he does? Milo Lucian makes no sense. After the prison scene, when Morbius realizes that Milo's the one been doing all the killing, he breaks out and he tracks him down with his nonsense powers, which we'll get to in a minute, by the way. And they have a bit of a bust-up, but why? Initially, the reason for this conflict seems to be one of two things. Either it's because Milo has surrendered to his bloodlust and Morbius wants him to stop killing people, or it's because Milo's trying to force Morbius to use his new powers and embrace this new self, this new powerful self. Why does he want that? Well, it seems to either be a riff on the idea of evolution that the film sort of brings up once or twice and postures like it's gonna say something interesting about, or it's some kind of result from the way he was bullied when he was younger. There's a scene where he's hitting on a girl in a bar, and she's got a boyfriend, and that boyfriend's kind of a dick to him, and then Milo comes back and kills the boyfriend. So the idea is given to us that maybe, oh, look at this, if you bully someone and then they get power, they turn into a bully. But then a little way into this first fracas the two vampires have, another option is suggested. Milo kills a bunch of police and then says something like, now the whole world will know what it feels like to be us and have death hanging over your head. That's a cool idea. Maybe do something else with that film, but nope, it's just a line. If this film was less of a studio-mandated Frankenstein's monster of a really generic tropey superhero movie and more of a, artistic exploration of ideas, you could do something with this idea. You could make it into a comment on healthcare and how different the lived experience is for someone with the sort of life-threatening condition these people have, especially in a country with a healthcare system like America's. But nope, it's one line, he kills a bunch of cops, he says the line, and then it's back to punching. There's also another option for his motivation which comes into focus later in the film. He's jealous of Morbius for finding love because he's got this thing about how love isn't on the cards for them, and he's maybe jealous of Martine for taking Morbius away from him. I don't know, the film doesn't really ever try and suggest that, but I'm trying to use my brain here. The result is a character who acts seemingly at random, because from time to time the film throws out a couple of ideas for, possible motivations, things that drive this character, but there's like 5. They don't really make any sense together, and none of them are explored in any depth whatsoever. Pick 1, pick 2, and, maybe you've got a character there. But honestly, from a writing perspective, Milo still feels like a draft, an outline of a character. It is painfully apparent that the only real thing driving this character is the need for a villain for Morbius to fight. And speaking of Morbius, why are we supposed to like this character? Alright, sure, he's struggled with this disability his whole life, so you feel for the guy to start, but when you see him just be snarky and arrogant even before he has his bat accident thing, some of that goodwill goes. And afterwards, he kills a ship full of people. That one guy was being a bit of a prick, but we have no reason to think that the other Long Island pirates were bad people. So Morbius messes up an experiment and gets a bunch of people killed in a stunt which also puts Martine in the hospital. Then when Milo comes to see him and Morbius doesn't give him any actual answers, Morbius indirectly creates another vampire who goes around killing more people. There's a scene in the second half of the movie where after Morbius finds Martine on the Michael Moore bus, they're sat in a cafe and some ruffians come through the door. It seems like we're being set up for the classic vigilante stops robbers thing to show that, Morbius is trying to do good with his powers or whatever, and that would have been boring, but it would have at least shown us that this guy's, an okay human being deep down. But no, they don't rob anything, they're counterfeiters. So Morbius follows them, finds their boss, breaks his hand, and steals the lab. And I'm not on the side of the counterfeiters, but it's hardly the mafia, mafia, it's just a bunch of hoodlums doing low-level crime. I don't think anyone gets into counterfeiting because their life is going fantastically, so yeah, all this scene tells us is that Morbius continues to act in self-interest. But the worst part is when Milo kills off Martine for some cheap motivation, and Morbius finds her dying body, he doesn't use his super speed and flight to get her to a hospital, he drinks her blood! She's not dead yet, he could have saved her. But no, he uses her as a power-up for the final fight. And yeah, I know she comes back to life later on, but I'm pretending that doesn't happen because it's stupid and it doesn't make any sense. So again, why are we rooting for Morbius? If the answer is we're not supposed to like him, this is a character study of a flawed person who makes bad choices and has to deal with the consequences, then that's a good idea, but it doesn't work because the character is never really studied. He's got all the depth of a cardboard box. So the character stuff is pretty stupid, but if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to the powers these vampires have, because Jesus Christ, what is going on here, man? I know that no superhero origin, no superpowers really make any proper sense, but categorically they all make more sense than this. The guy puts some bat genes into him and his face morphs in and out of this monstrous visage, and he can go super fast and he's super strong. I buy the thing about the coagulants affecting the disease. It's not too much of a stretch to say that that leads to, you know, the speed and the strength, but how does that mean he can fly in the way he does in this film? How does that give him bat telepathy? And why is there like a vapor trail effect, a particle effect whenever he uses these powers? The bats don't even have this. Why does he give off these particles? How does that make any sense? At least give me some pseudoscience or technobabble pretending to explain this. That's all I'm asking for. The film also wants to play with the idea that this bat DNA power thing is linked to historical vampire myths. We see multiple scenes of people reading vampire stories talking about stakes to the heart. In the final battle, Matt Smith wields a makeshift stake, but the film never tries to explain why we or the characters should think this is relevant at all. By the film's own admission, these powers are a combination of this rare blood disease and the bat thing. You're telling me that medieval Europeans got to Central America before Columbus and managed to fuse their DNA with this rare species of Costa Rican bat? How would they have done this? So yeah, the film seems like it wants to bring in this mythological layer at the 11th hour, but it doesn't even attempt to establish why or how this could be relevant at all. Look, there's a lot of problems like this. There's nonsensical power sets, nonsensical explanations for things, nonsensical characters with arcs that don't track, and non-existent motivations. I'm normally happy to try and look past flaws like these, though, if there's something behind the flaws worth looking past them for. Let's return to the example of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I don't think that's a great film. I don't even think it's a particularly good one, but it has elements which make it worth watching. The Peter-Gwen relationship, or the unmatched visualization of Spider-Man, his personality, and his powers on screen. Morbius, though, has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. It doesn't stand out technically, or in terms of performance. It's not particularly funny, and the writing is abysmal, and there's no interesting themes at play behind all of this. I can look past a flawed surface layer, but there's nothing beneath it. It's all surface, and that surface is awful. That's why Morbius broke me. One thing I try and do on this channel is engage with pop culture seriously. Look at a film or a project that many critics would write off and tease out interesting themes or narratives that are at play there. But I can't do that with Morbius. It isn't giving me anything to work with. For an example of what I'm talking about, when Eternals came out and that was critically panned, I made one of my favourite videos to date on the film exploring its philosophy. I can't do anything like that with Morbius because there's nothing to analyse. It's so empty. I have one single observation of a time that this film tried to do something imaginative. When Milo's stalking Martine, there's a couple of shots of her window and him on the street below, and the way this moment is framed makes it seem like an intentional reversal of the earlier shot in the flashback sequence near the film's start, where the school bullies are pointing at the hospital kids and laughing. The implication being that Matt Smith's character is no longer the bullied, he is the bully. That's it. That's all I've got. The only moment where anything in this film feels original or human at all. Apart from that, it's all transparently soulless, rote franchise bile. Its sole purpose being for Sony to wring every penny they can from the Spider-Man rights they own. And on this topic, it's probably about time we talked about the post-credits scenes. If you haven't seen the film and you don't know what happens in them, first of all, I'm jealous of you. Second, here's a recap. We see that No Way Home rift in the sky, and then Adrian Toomes, the Vulture from Homecoming, played by Michael Keaton, shows up apropos of nothing in a jail cell. He's then released from jail because he's done no crimes in this universe, and that's the end of that, for all of 2 minutes until the next post-credit scene rolls around. We see Morbius driving a car in the middle of the night to the middle of nowhere, where he's greeted by Vulture in his flight suit from Homecoming. Vulture then says to him, and I'm not joking, this is word for word the line in the film, "I'm still figuring this out, but I think a bunch of guys like us should team up." Hold on, Sony, I think you left the line from the draft script in the final cut by mistake. Or maybe they didn't, maybe it's intentional, because this line accidentally or otherwise points perfectly to Sony's strategy. They don't know what they're doing, they're still figuring it out, but they just think it would be so neat if a bunch of guys like this teamed up for no reason whatsoever. Vulture even blames Spider-Man for this universe hopping. Morbius doesn't know who that is. Sony themselves established just a few months ago that in the Venom universe, of which this film is clearly a part, they don't know who Spider-Man is. Nothing in these scenes makes any sense whatsoever. The multiverse stuff from No Way Home doesn't work like this. Sony's just trying to gaslight us otherwise so they can wring a few more pennies out of the Spider-Man license. And as others have noted, this Vulture's characterization is just completely different from what we saw in Homecoming. And also, we see him materialize in this world in a jail cell, in a jail uniform. How's he got his flight suit? He can't have built a new one in this world because it runs on Chitauri tech. Look, I get it, Sony, you want to latch onto the success of the MCU Spider-Man and print some money from it, that's fine. That's what studios do under capitalism, sure, go for it. But just don't do it in the most brain-dead way possible. That's all we're asking. The MCU has literally just established the existence of variants. You could have just used Keaton as a Vulture variant from this universe. Then you wouldn't have had to break the laws of the universe that you helped Marvel set out in No Way Home. Look, you could very easily do an entire video on these post-credit scenes alone, and how stupid they are in so many ways. But I just don't have the energy left to talk about this anymore. That's what Morbius is, really. It's one long slog through never-ending bullshit. The idea being that by the end, your willpower will be so drained, and your logical faculties will be so defeated that you stop questioning any of it, and you enter a vegetative state of passive media consumption. It should have been named Dr. Morbius, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Sony. This film is not worth the effort. It's painfully obvious that if you even stop to consider these blindingly apparent inconsistencies, you've spent more effort thinking about Morbius than its own writers did, who, by the way, I'm convinced are a room full of bats injected with human DNA. You know, I'm starting to think that what I see when I look at Morbius is how critics of the superhero genre see every superhero film. And for the first time, I can kind of see where some of them are coming from. Because the budget for this was $75 million. Think about how many actually good films that money could have made if Sony gave some of it to independent filmmakers. If the future of superhero cinema looks at all like Morbius, then I'll be tapping out sooner rather than later. And if my voice has sounded weird in these last few minutes, it's now the next day. I'm still recording this video and I've woken up not feeling great with a pretty sore throat. And I think it's fairly clear what's caused this. Morbius broke me so hard that I've fallen ill. There's probably a joke to be made here about a film all about bats giving me a certain disease, but hey, I don't want this video to get flagged, so I'll hold off. In conclusion, Morbius is a film repulsive to fans of the genre, but disgusting to moviegoers more widely. And yeah, I'm gonna stop talking about it now before I lose what's left of my mind. As always, thanks to all my patrons on screen now, and especially Kevin Douglas and Ian Fifield.